Hello, and welcome to today's video. With the upcoming event film, Avengers Endgame, I've decided that I'm going to go back and rewatch all of the Marvel films, and today we're going to talk about Phase 1. Phase 1 of what has essentially been Marvel's experiment in film consists of Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, the First Avenger, and the Avengers. Be warned, from here on out, we are going to be talking spoilers for each of these films. And first up is going to be Iron Man. Now, this is Iron Man's origin story, the whole story about him in a cave. Now, it starts with given his backstory in this very precise and condensed manner. He's getting an award. Here's everything he's done up to this point. Off he goes into a cave. Now, when he ends up in this cave and he's kidnapped by these terrorists, and everything that he sees kind of turns his life around. Total moment where he goes, I can't live like this, things have to change. Then he builds his Iron Man suits. Once he goes through all this, and his business partner Obadiah Stane decides that it's not best for business, turns on him, leads into a big fight. And then after all the credits roll, we get this very first tease of what's to come, and that's Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury talking about the Avengers initiative. So, you're sitting here going, why does this matter for Endgame? Probably doesn't. The only way I see this movie mattering for Endgame is if there is time travel elements to lead back to events of this film. This movie is more character development than plot when we look at the aspect of Avengers Endgame. Next up is The Incredible Hulk. Now, this film is a little bit different as we don't get this true origin story. They kind of give us the accident that happens during the credits, during the open credits, and there goes off and running everything we need to know on what makes Bruce Banner the Incredible Hulk. This leads us to South America and a film that is essentially about Bruce Banner trying to remove the Hulk from him while being chased by the U.S. Army. Most notably, General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. Eventually, he gets cornered in Harlem by a man who takes super soldier serum and Banner's blood, kind of makes himself an abomination of all these different kind of technologies. Battle ensues. Harlem's broken. Movie's not that great. I highly doubt this is going to lead anywhere into Endgame. It is referenced later on in other films, most notably Avengers, which we will talk later. And then we do have General Ross return later on in the series, most notably Avengers Infinity War and Captain America Civil War, which we will talk about in another video. Other than the potential of General Ross, this movie has very little weight to the future of the MCU, and in that aspect is more character development than plot development. Next up, we have our first sequel, Iron Man 2. Now, this film is going to be as close to an adaptation of the classic Iron Man story, A Demon in the Bottle, as we're going to get. As that story deals with Tony's addiction to alcohol, this story sees him dying, but not being able to fix it because it's coming out of his arc reactor. Throughout the film, he learns bits and pieces about how his dad started to make it and what that is essentially doing to his body, and that it's unfinished technology. And once he changes the element that runs the arc reactor, he's no longer poisoning himself, but he finds that he has to essentially beat the sins of he has to beat the son of the man that his father had deported while helping him run the arc reactor project in the 70s, maybe the 60s. Again, this film doesn't have a lot to do with the Infinity Stones or much to do with the lead into Avengers Endgame outside showing Tony Stark's character arc. So, in that aspect, this is still more character development other than plot development. Now, this brings us to Thor. Now, he has one of the bigger arcs in his own first solo film because we're introduced to Thor, Odin, Loki, among other Asgardians. After Loki messes with Thor's coronation, he decides to go to Jotunheim and essentially start a little bit of trouble. After Odin saves him, he casts him out, he banishes him from Asgard to where he must learn what it truly means to be king of Asgard and to be able to wield his hammer Mjolnir. He does. He fights a big mechanized destroyer, destroys a New Mexican town, to where he eventually fights Loki, destroys the Bifrost to save Jotunheim instead of worrying about his love for Jane. Again, here we are. More character arc than plot arc, but we do get a little bit more as we're introduced to Loki and we are introduced to the aspect of the cosmic universe. And Thor explains magic in a very interesting way to Jane. And magic and science are one and the same, it's just on how it's perceived. Now this brings us to our last solo origin film, Captain America, the First Avenger. This film is actually starts and ends in the present day, but most of the story takes place between 1942 and 1944 or 45. And it's all about Steve Rogers, this great guy who just wants to stop a bully in Nazi Germany. All he wants to do is fight and do no less than the next guy. That's all he wants. The problem is he physically can't do it. One of the doctors, as he's stamping his enlistment form, says you'd be ineligible on your asthma alone. And he's got this long list of things that's medically wrong with him. Eventually, a man hears this and says, you have a good heart. I want you to do this project. I'm going to bring you in. You're going to train. And then they give him the super soldier serum, enhance him with Vita Rays, and off we go. But the doctor is killed. The serum is destroyed. And there isn't much they can do. So they decide to use this new jacked up super soldier as a marketing tool for the US Army instead of to fight the war. Eventually he ends up overseas, his best friend has been captured, and he decides to mount a rescue mission alone. After coming back from successfully saving, I think he said 300 men, he's on the front lines, not only fighting Nazi Germany, but fighting Hydra and the Red Skull. This eventually brings us up to the final fight in the Wings of the Valkyrie, as the Red Skull would say. The movie is revolving around a cube. This cube is known as a Tesseract. We don't know anything about it other than the fact that it can transfer energy to make weapons, to fuel the Valkyrie, and eventually Captain America knocks it off its pedestal, Red Skull picks it up, and whoosh, he's gone. Then it sinks through the ship. And that's all we really know about that cube until later. And we'll talk about what comes up later when those movies come up. Steve can't save the ship, crashes it, frozen in North Pole for 70 years. Wakes up modern day, and there isn't anything he can do. He doesn't understand the world. He's a man out of time. This film, for the most part, is character development. It doesn't necessarily show Steve becoming a better person because he's always been a good person. Just shows him becoming a better soldier. But it does introduce the Tesseract, and based on what that is and where it comes, you could see the plot kind of starting here, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend this film to move forward. Now, the last film we're going to talk about today is Marvel's The Avengers, the first team-up that brings together Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, Thor, Captain America, Black Widow, who was first shown in Iron Man 2, and Hawkeye, who had a very small cameo within Thor. Brings them all together to fight who else but Loki. At the end of Thor, Loki fell, disappeared. He thought he was dead. He comes back with a scepter that can control minds. Okay, that's weird. He comes out of nowhere because the Tesseract apparently opened a door and let him through. Now, throughout the film, he kind of goes a little crazy. The team comes together, and everyone is kind of distrustful of Nick Fury. But they're all there, they're all together, and that's kind of where things start to pick up. They have the scepter, the Avengers have the scepter, and it's kind of picking up, making people more aggressive. It changed Hawkeye from a bad guy, from a good guy, and it changed Hawkeye from this good guy to a mind-controlled kind of zombie. We go on to eventually Loki getting captured. Everybody they check out the scepter. Loki escapes, takes the scepter, takes the Tesseract to New York City. Big giant tower that says Stark on it, creates a portal in the sky. Incoming army. So we have the Avengers, all 6 of them, fighting in New York. And when they first all get together, they have this one shot where they're all in a circle, and then the camera pans around it, and to this day, this shot still gives me chills. It's one of the best shots, probably in the whole series. Definitely one of the best shots of the first 6 films. Eventually a nuke comes in, Tony Stark shoots it up the big floaty hole in the sky, and Black Widow is able to take the scepter, touch the cube, turn off the portal. Everybody has saved the day. The last scene of the film, we see Loki and Thor going back to Asgard via the Tesseract, and what we don't see, but find out in a later film, is that Loki's scepter ends up staying with S.H.I.E.L.D. And we then find out during the mid-credits scene that Loki was given the scepter and manipulated by a big purple guy who we eventually find out is Thanos. So with that said, this film is essentially plot. This has got a little bit of character development in it for each of them coming together and how they feel about each other. But for the most part, this is all plot leading into Avengers Endgame. And Avengers would be the first film that I would recommend you watch if you have a very limited schedule on what you need to watch. With that being said, have you seen these films? If you have, go ahead and leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. And if you can't wait to talk about phases 2 or 3, go ahead and hit me up at my social media. The links are in the description below. Go ahead and like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe for even more content. And until next time, have a great night.